For this week, we covered 6 major civilizations and how they understood the world and their place in it. This told us both how they structured their societies and why, and also how that structuring, which always happens through values hierarchies, led them to develop different types of ideas, philosophies, and sciences. In this video, we'll go through these civilizations quickly, and we will mostly focus on their metaphysical side. Because we're dealing with actual civilizations, you will be able to see the practical way to use the metaphysical ideas instead of all the abstract stuff we did so far. If you're unsure what's metaphysics, structura, and ethics, I suggest you go back and watch a few previous videos. First though, why these 6? And why is the Western world not included? The first 5 civilizations, Sumer, Egypt, India, China, and Greece, are civilizations that sprang up almost from nothing. This is important because we can see how they developed their own ideas about the world. The Roman Empire, for example, used a lot of pieces from other places, including Greece, so it's not clear how and why they built their society exactly the way they did, or rather, it's much more difficult to figure out. All these civilizations we're covering also did have a very big influence on the West, so understanding them at least a little is very helpful for later readings. The 6th civilization is the Islamic civilization. This one was chosen for a few reasons. First, within 150 years from its start, it had connected to all 5 of the civilizations of antiquity. Second, because it originated in Arabia, which was culturally isolated and not very well developed, it works mostly like one of the classical civilizations, so we can really easily track down the how and why of their development. Third, it was extremely focused on acquiring knowledge from everyone, and so it ended up putting together all sorts of ideas from the first 5 civilizations and creating new and bigger ideas. Fourth, it developed a lot of modern sciences and fields of study. Finally, through its contact with the West, it had a very big influence on our own ideas by giving us the wisdom of the ancient civilizations and their own developments. None of this is to say that other civilizations are not important to study, just that their effect on the modern West happens later on, and they are geographically disconnected from much of the rest of the world, and so they don't provide as useful an example as these 6. Our first civilization was Sumer. They were located in mudland with crazy unpredictable storms causing chaos. What's interesting is that because they didn't think you could communicate with the gods, because you can't talk down a storm, it also meant that you couldn't pray the storm away or keep it from coming. Instead of worrying about pleasing the gods, Sumerian primary concern was managing enough order to stay alive. Later on, as they got more stability and order, their ideas of gods also changed, but that's a different issue. We should try to imagine what the Sumerians had to deal with to figure out how to find some semblance of order in the world. Here's a nice analogy. Imagine you're a water strider. You skim along the water surface all happy, living it up as a water strider, and then suddenly your whole world explodes. Massive waves, watery explosions, it's all you can do to not die. Boom, once, twice, 3 times. And you start trying to find any kind of pattern to these life-threatening events. Are they timed, like every 5 seconds or something? Nope. Is there an order to the distribution of the explosions? Nope. What you don't know is that there's a 2-year-old behind the grass chucking rocks at random. But you still need a way to not die, so you pay attention. And then you notice that when you see a dark spot here, the area in the back of the pond will soon explode. Well, that's something. All you need to do is pay attention, and if you see that dark spot, you need to go in the opposite direction. The strider believes that the spot is the thing that causes the explosions because he sees the spot and then sees an explosion. Now, he's wrong about the mechanics, but he's not wrong about the meaning. And we can see that he's right about the meaning because he keeps on surviving by using that meaning. From our perspective, it's not that the dark spot causes the explosions. We get that the dark spot is a shadow created by the rock when it passes between the sun and the pond. We also get that if the dark spot shows up around here, it means that it generally has so much speed that it can only hit the back end of the pond. From the water strider's perspective though, things are different. It doesn't understand shadows or inertia and momentum. It just knows how to recognize a pattern and use that recognition to not die. This is how Sumerians developed things like math, geometry, and astronomy, by paying attention to everything that might have a pattern, because humans are amazing at detecting patterns. But to detect one, you need a relatively stable backdrop against which changes are happening. so that you can correctly identify the moving parts. That's why the Sumerians looked at the sky. It was the only thing in their experience that was stable and orderly. While they couldn't talk to the gods, they did believe that the intentions of the gods could be glimpsed by observing other natural phenomena. Before the gods moved, they would somehow disturb the orderly procession of the heavens, like how water ripples when a big fish moves just under the surface. Although their ideas about what the world is like were wrong, they led them to develop a few core sciences from scratch. I mean, they invented math and geometry, they invented writing, they invented astronomy, all of that so they could do astrology. The idea of getting the pattern right but the explanation wrong is also found in checking chicken livers to determine if a flood or a drought is coming. Oddly enough, this works. Kind of. Chickens are omnivores. They eat plants and meat. Well, they eat worms and grubs, but that's a source of meat. But their access to meat is limited because those worms and grubs live in the ground, so you have to dig to find them. Additionally, those worms and grubs follow the moisture in the earth, so if it's dry, they burrow deeper, and if it's moist, they rise higher. The thing to remember is that when you have massive rivers without artificial banks, like the Tigris and the Euphrates, it's really hard to estimate the water level. It could be a foot or two up or down, and you won't be able to tell the difference. But the worms and the grubs are really sensitive to this, so they react to even the tiniest changes. Now, if you have a chicken with a lot of meat in its diet, that gives you a different coloration of the organ processing the food, in this case, the liver. A lot of meat in the diet means higher water level, which means less chance of a drought because there's already a lot of water in the soil. But this also means more likely floods because in case of serious rainfall, that water has nowhere to go. If you have a chicken with a lot of plant in its diet, that means a lower water level, which means an increased chance of drought because the water level is already low. But it also means less likely floods because now you have a lot of runoff room in case of severe rains. And we're amazing at finding these patterns. We're not so amazing in explaining how they work, but that's not as important. All we really need, in the sense of survival, is to recognize patterns and act in whatever way keeps us not dead. So, the Sumerian most important idea was order. That's their GHE. They knew it was possible because they saw orderly heavens. They also knew that the earth was naturally chaotic, and this told them how to model themselves on that order so that they could manage chaos. And this is their GHE to HE relation. The proper way of behavior was the chaos reduction types of activities and the order increasing ones. That's the HE. And the way they related to order was through their own orderliness as individuals and as a society. That's their GHE to HE. Egyptians, unlike Sumerians, had a very orderly life, so they don't worry about predicting the future because the future would be like the past. What they did worry about was the cycle of death and rebirth, because if the sun, moon, and the Nile, and everything else, lives, dies, and then is reborn, that's how they saw it at least, then what about humans? Some humans were obviously here as a way to keep the orderliness of the heavens on earth. That's the role of the pharaohs. This kind of idea helped unify the people behind the concept of what a pharaoh is and willingly serve the social needs, like building the pyramids. While there are a lot of cool Egypt facts, I would like to highlight only two here. First, notice the size of the pyramid. Those people standing there are normal-sized adults. This is a good point to remember because we often forget what it means for this massive construction project to be realized. Imagine hauling stones that are as tall, long, and wide as you are tall, and now imagine hauling 2.3 million of them. So the pyramid is impressive by all standards. Second, when you see inside the pyramid, you can see these four shafts leading outside. They're pointed straight at the four major constellations that Egyptians imagined as important to their beliefs. The amount of work necessary to pull this off is nothing short of insane. The precision, giant stones needing to be arranged in perfect order, the load bearing above these openings being balanced, all these things, and that's barely the beginning of the kind of work necessary to actually bring them to full fruition. For the Egyptians, the gods were their GHE, the cyclical patterns and the pharaohs are the GHE to HE. Now these patterns are the natural part and the pharaohs are the connection with the gods, and they are also the source of social rules and laws. Acting out the laws and the social rules, including voluntarily building the pyramids, was the HE, and the stable society that follows cyclical nature was the HE to GHE. When we look at India, we have a system that's not rigorously governed by geography. Of course, the civilization is still located on a major river, but the weather conditions are not the key to understanding the civilization. Instead, we start with their religious and social system, partially because by the time we get written records, this is already up and running. What is often brought up in relation to Hindu religious and social structure is the caste system, specifically how evil it is and things of that nature. What I want to show you today is a very different take on that idea. Just so we're clear at the start, I'm not advocating for a caste system. I just think that in the context of when and how the system was established, it had a lot more merits as well as the negatives. Understanding those merits lets us understand both why the system was adopted and how it managed to last such a long time. Usually when we think of this kind of stratified society, the idea is that the people at the bottom do all the work, while the people at the top do nothing but get rich and fat off the labor of others. We get this impression from historical examples, but also from the fact that the guy lifting rocks all day is clearly doing work. The guy at the top is lounging while someone feeds him grapes, and maybe somebody else is standing around and fanning him. That seems like a broken system, right? Well, this may be the case if you have a badly structured or corrupt society. For the moment, let's ignore why people are at the level that they're at. Let's focus on what the different levels do and don't do. The people at the bottom do a lot of hard labor. They're not making bank off that labor either, and life is not exactly sunshine and roses. But their jobs are simple: lift rock, walk, put rock down. They clock in at 8 in the morning and clock out at 5. Once that rock lifter clocks out, his time is his own. He may not have a lot of money to enjoy that time, but that's a different issue. But the people at the top, if the system works, don't just lounge around. That's just the impression you get if you don't understand their jobs. People at the top are responsible for making sure that whatever project it is correctly planned out, that all the materials, people, and other infrastructure elements that make that construction possible are running smoothly. In a broader sense, they're making sure that the society does not collapse. Their jobs are exceedingly difficult, making short and long-term plans by understanding nature, human nature, economics, geometry, math, astronomy, agriculture, geography, politics, war, conflict resolution, etc. For the people at the top, there is no such thing as off the clock. Their work days are longer, they're always on call, they have little or no personal time. We give them the cooks and the people fanning them because their time is too valuable to spend on something that an average 10-year-old can do. If the rock lifter fails at his job, rocks don't get moved. But if the ruler screws up, societies can collapse. That also means that the rock lifter can make emotional decisions, non-rational ones, because the consequences are limited. But the person at the top cannot afford emotional decisions because if they're not rational, the whole thing collapses. This is kind of like comparing the janitors at Tesla to Elon Musk. Just because Elon Musk is not pushing a bucket around does not mean that he's not working. In fact, it's only because Elon Musk spent time thinking, in other words, sitting there and doing nothing, if you will, that the janitor and the other 37,000 people at Tesla have a job. It's only because of Elon Musk's thinking that Tesla exists. Productivity is not universally measured by how many rocks you've lifted today. That's a metric for rock lifters. Similarly, the harmonious social existence of culture is not the metric by which we judge rock lifters. A functional hierarchy is one where the talent is distributed in a way where everyone does the job that they're best qualified for and which is necessary to complete that hierarchy. The fact that the top of the hierarchy is occupied by a smaller number of people speaks to the difficulty of making it up there. But the Hindu hierarchy is one where you're not allowed to move out of the position you were born in. This seems to lock in a birth advantage or disadvantage without reference to the quality of work a person is capable of. That's no longer the same merit-based hierarchy, but in a certain way it still is. You see, the higher up you go, the more education a person has. That is, they're made more capable because they're access to and focus on developing a skill set their whole lives. And while it's possible to have a nobody become a brilliant leader, you get far more reliably decent leaders when you make sure that the people who can get into those positions are incredibly well educated and trained, and this increases your social stability over time. Yes, you can still get a person who is incapable despite that education, but the odds of keeping a stable society, especially in those days, was by betting on educated people and not on uneducated random ones. As a final point of benefit, knowing exactly what you'll be doing as a profession from the day you're born and being surrounded by experts on the subject means that you will reach the master level at your job a lot quicker, and that frees you up to get creative and innovative and discover new things. As an example, if you're going into the same field as your parents, you get an incredible amount of education about the profession before you ever start college just by being around them, and that gives you a competitive advantage. This has allowed the Indian society to produce marvels of technology because reaching master status earlier means that you have more time to get creative and to make new innovations. That seems to have been a major contribution as to why we have the amazing inventions that India produced, because 40 generations of blacksmiths are bound to figure out something new. The Hindu religion is their whole structura. Atman or Brahman is the GHE and represents that grand unity of all things. The teachings, especially those on the illusion of the world, dharma and karma, are the GHE to HE relation. Our interaction with the world is the HE and should be structured solely according to dharma, and the extent to which our society and social structures reflect the rules of dharma is the HE to GHE. China, like India, has a very layered structure to their society. The main difference is the degree of social mobility available in a person's lifetime. The Chinese were big on advancing people on the basis of demonstrated knowledge and ability, but first, there are a few ideas we should cover again because they're amazingly important. First of these is the Chinese idea of good and evil as almost entirely different from our own. When we think of moral statements, we're thinking of absolute rules. This is a feature of Christianity, so that certain things are never allowed. But in the Chinese system, good and bad are defined by the context of the situation. That means that one person's good choice is another person's bad choice, and it all depends on what their circumstances were. Just to be clear though, the Chinese were big believers that we had a lot of input into what our circumstances ended up being. If you made good choices that made the most of the situation, then the next set of choices would come with an even better potential and so forth. Coincidentally, this happens to be measurably true across all sectors of our society and is nicknamed the Matthew Principle. I'll put a link in the description. But how did they define this whole making the best of circumstances? Well, we can look at the following example. This is a quote from Lao Tzu in the Tao Te Ching. And it says, "Fine weapons are instruments of evil. They are hated by men. Therefore, those who possess Tao turn away from them." Weapons are instruments of evil, not the instruments of a good ruler. When he uses them unavoidably, he regards calm restraint as the best principle. Even when he is victorious, he does not regard it as praiseworthy, for to praise victory is to delight in the slaughter of men. He who delights in the slaughter of men will not succeed. For the slaughter of the multitude let us weep with sorrow and grief. For a victory let us observe the occasion with funeral ceremonies. In considering this passage, we should think of what it means to possess fine weapons. Namely, fine weapons represent a great investment of money, time, resources, and humanity in a project whose best case scenario is slaughter of men. Alternately, these things represent all the time, resources, and effort spent not doing socially constructive things. The need for such tools as weapons may be inevitable, but to use them properly requires the understanding of their role. Thus, to have fine weapons and use them carelessly means to rob the society of all the things it could have used to create a better society and to advance in new and innovative ways. So it's the long-term effects and the sum of the effort invested that are taken into consideration. This is why a burned dinner is evil. Someone sacrificed a part of their life working to make the money, then sacrificed a part of their life to get the groceries, and then sacrifice a part of their life to do the prep work and start cooking, and then all of it ends up worthless. The problem isn't that the dinner will be late or that you will be hungry tonight. The problem is that days of someone's life were just destroyed, and all that sacrifice was made with nothing to show for it. The other big point is that everything is connected, and if we set those relations well, then we get a stable, harmonious, productive, and safe society. If we end up in undesirable circumstances, it's because we failed to make the most of things, or someone up the hierarchy did. Just as in the Indian hierarchy, and every other hierarchy for that matter, the higher up a person is, the worse their screw-ups are, because they have a ripple effect down the hierarchy. This is why harmony and following the Tao are such a big deal, because the harmonious structure of the society hinges on getting these things right, or your society will collapse, and then all that effort and all those countless years of lives invested into making it work are thrown away. As we move up the hierarchy, our decisions make more use of more lives of others, or end up wasting them. Because the focus is on peak performance, the Chinese had few hang-ups on the class system. Instead, they pioneered the idea that standardized testing, which could be taken by anyone, was the proper way to determine who was qualified for which government office. Of course, the questions of military and the emperor were not decided this way, but you could rise from a backwoods farmer to the second most important person in the empire just by your knowledge and performance. In the Chinese system, the Tao represents the GHE. The ideas that the Tao produces, such as harmony, propriety, long-term aims and successes, stability, order, and such, they are the GHE to HE. The HE part is all about putting those ideas into practice by making full use of your potential. A society that does this as a social structure and through individual citizens creates a harmonious and stable existence that characterizes the HE to GHE relation. The Greece reading gives us a very interesting moment in the metaphysical structure of a society. It captures the moment of social collapse because the top of the metaphysical hierarchy breaks down. As noted, the Greeks had adopted the Homeric narrative about gods, which seemed to have been produced during the Greek Dark Ages. From Homer's idea about gods, they constructed their ideas about how the world is and isn't, and on top of that, they built their societies. We don't often think about these issues today, but a society is made possible by the ideas we have on crucial questions. Questions like the meaning of society, and justice, and power, and goodness, etc. For the Greeks, these ideas were taken from Homer, and he supposedly got them from the gods. It's really important to get this right. When Greeks thought about Homer, they didn't think that he came up with the Iliad and the Odyssey. They thought that those stories were told to him by the Muses, who are divine messengers. This means that it wasn't Homer who was the authority, it was the gods. You could disagree with Homer, but not with the gods, because you were on an even playing field with Homer, but not with the gods. But the stories Homer told started to come apart slowly but surely. No one was seeing any of these gods, but according to Homer, they were supposed to be coming out from behind every tree and shrub. Sure, the people kept on building statues and temples to the gods, but that's because doing so was a social thing to do. To give you a modern example, Christmas is supposed to be about Jesus and repentance and getting your act together before God, but now we have this instead.
I think you should do a play about what Christmas is really about. Christmas is about how Santa died for our gifts and rose from the dead and moved to the North Pole. And because of that, every year Santa comes down to forgive us our sins and give us eternal presents.
But people are still out buying trees and ornaments and gifts and all that because it's a socially expected behavior, no matter that half the people can't tell you what's going on and don't actually believe in it. This is called social inertia, when socially expected behavior loses all metaphysical support but keeps on rolling because it is social custom. Part of the reason Greek theology started to come apart is because it was so unstable to begin with. Different gods have overlapping jurisdictions, they're more flawed than the average human, and they're constantly infighting. That way, there is no solid footing for the people. You make one god happy, but tick off another, and there is no telling which one of those will decide to act, or even if a god protecting you will at all be able to help your safety. You can see this, by the way, in the fact that the Greeks were so superstitious. You need to see the future and protect yourself from the unknown evil only if the whole social structure is unstable. This is the same kind of problem that the Sumerians had, except that their problem was at least theoretically solvable by astronomy. When a system is running on nothing but social inertia, it's getting ready to collapse. This is because social inertia can only carry us so far. Basic human drives and desires are always pushing back against rules because they want more freedom and less restraint. This creates social friction. When you have a metaphysical push for behavior to be a certain way, this overcomes the social friction and the society keeps going. But when the metaphysical support is gone, that is, when the living implications of ethics die off and no longer support the behavior or an institution, then the only thing that keeps you going is social inertia. Over time, social friction kills off the social inertia and the whole thing comes to a stop. Think of it this way. You have to step on the gas to get your car to move. You get it up to a comfortable 60 miles an hour, but you have to keep the gas pedal pressed to maintain that speed. If you take your foot off the gas, the friction of your tires on the road starts to slow you down. You are still moving, but the car is slowing down. If the engine completely shuts off, you will cruise for a while, but then you will come to a complete stop. So long as we're still rolling, we generally don't notice that the metaphysical support for an idea is gone. It's only when we come to a complete stop that we look down. The Greek metaphysical system had the gods at the top, that's the GHE. The Homeric story and the rules of that story work as the GHE to HE. Human interactions, based on the values from those stories, were the HE. However, notice that just because you did all the right things does not mean that you're getting the proper society. That's the HE to GHE. This is because the first two elements, GHE and GHE to HE, are confused. The same thing that may get you rewarded may also bring down the wrath of some other gods and wreck your whole thing. In my estimation, this is a good indication of the meaning of philosophy in Greece. It was an attempt to work out a different set of sacred values to plug into the society. These values should have justified the ideas that Greeks already had. If the values change, then the whole society changes, because the reason for behavior changes. Unfortunately, as we noted with Thales and Anaximander and the rest, the attempt to use philosophy for this purpose only managed to reveal a problem the Greeks had not really considered, the importance of authority. We can be perfectly reasonable and disagree on the basis of reason. Because we're all just using reason, my position can't be inherently better than yours. I may be able to enforce it better than you, but that's no proof of truth. The authority of a superhuman source, on the other hand, can't be challenged like that. That was the benefit of the Homeric system. It was not about Homer, and so long as it could not be challenged the same way that Thales got challenged, that's what allowed it to last as long as it did. Finally, the Islamic civilization is actually a series of kingdoms and empires, but all of them share the same core ideas and actually put them into practice. That's why we can speak about them as a group. Islamically, God is the GHE, revelation is the GHE to HE, human actions, which are supposed to be founded on revelation, are the HE, and the stable and orderly society that results is the HE to GHE. However, the content of the revelation and the living implications it produced are the reason behind the astounding political spread of the Islamic empires, as well as their search for knowledge, its accumulation and development, and the social stress on universal education. If the core of what it means to be human is to use your reason instead of just have a soul, then it becomes individual and social responsibility to enable everyone to use their reason to the best of their ability. To do that, gathering all the knowledge one can find is very important, so is the free sharing of that knowledge and education for the masses, so that they can use those resources. Part of this accumulation also meant that the source of knowledge was unimportant. This way, the Islamic empires were perfectly comfortable taking non-religious ideas developed as part of other religions. They were also comfortable taking on non-Muslim scholars as part of their efforts to expand human knowledge. In Spain, the Muslim rulers paid for the construction of Jewish universities because knowledge is knowledge. This is how Europe got a hold of most of the early ideas that pulled it up from the Dark Ages. Spain, Sicily, and the Middle East were focus points for texts getting translated from Arabic and other languages into either Hebrew or Latin, which were languages commonly accessible in Europe. The same regions were the exchange points for technology, which is how Europe got paper, amongst other things. If we look at the system of metaphysical ideas and values, we can figure out what kinds of behaviors they will produce for individuals in society. That's going top down. If we look at the social and individual behaviors, we can track that backwards to get the values hierarchy and then the highest moral value of the individual or the society. When we're presented with new ideas, we can track their development or their justification to figure out the implications of what's being said. That way, we don't accidentally reject an idea or subscribe to it when it would contradict other ideas we have. These contradictions lead to collapse, which is a blue screen of death for your brain or your society.